In this video, I basically flex how terminally online I've become. What happened here? Yeah, we couldn't afford to pay the groundskeeper, so he left. Well, guess someone doesn't trust the grind. I'm eye-rolling, but you can't see it. You have eyes? Let's just start over. I thought I'd open with an all-too-classic introduction format, where I ask, what is a furry? Now, if I were my younger self, I would have probably landed on this widely accepted answer. Anyone with an interest in anthropomorphic animals. Okay, safe enough, but how does this reflect in our broader conscience? What about those at Disney who worked on, put their heart and soul in, and dreamt up the worlds of The Lion King or Zootopia? Or how about any of these films? Let's put the cheap shot profit argument aside and assume some artists who worked on these family-friendly animations are truly passionate about their work, of which their themes are pretty much centered around the phenomenon of anthropomorphization. If we go back to our working definition of furry, then would it be wrong to assume that these artists are furry themselves? Well, yeah, for the most part. Okay, but what if we introduce the concept of a spectrum? Maybe congoers and fursuiters are on the extreme end of furry, whereas artists working at these massive media conglomerates are just barely in the running. Well, I also have problems with this, and here's why. There's another widely accepted answer to our initial prompt, and it's this. Furry is defined by the individual and not by a set of rules or conditions that have to be met. Someone out there is taking a sigh of relief knowing that their fascination with Nick Wilde is not technically conducive enough for them to be labeled as furry. And that's how most of the fandom sees the term. It's a label that one applies to themselves. Labels are a topic that I, as someone who is involved in many different subcommunities, especially in the LGBTQ circle, have put a lot of thought into. On one end of the coin, labels can act as a healthy roadmap of sorts towards dissecting and figuring out one's identity. But they can also, by nature of their intended purpose, impose a gatekeeping element to the equation, which, in my case as well, often results in constant second-guessing of oneself. Am I an INFP or an INTJ? Of course, the fair side of the coin still stands above this negative side effect, with most labels of historical and cultural significance, such as lesbian, queer, neoliberal, etc., as a means to identify with a group of peoples, or to classify a collection of values that more or less describes said group on their own. That last example, neoliberal, is, of course, a political ideology. And political ideologies, in my opinion, exist on more of a rigid foundation of values and principles than, say, furry. Hey, I was worried I wouldn't be able to circle back. So, in a world where one is allowed solely by their discretion to choose whether or not to identify as furry, why should or shouldn't you? Let's first look at the case for doing so. Just so we're clear, I'd be spending way too much time on this video if I were to talk about the positives of the furry community as a whole, to which there are a lot. Instead, I want to focus mainly on the label furry and how it is perceived by fellow furs and normies alike. This will mainly hit a chord with you if you have some level of background in digital marketing or if you're really just a content creator. Speaking on the word perceived, perception is truly everything, especially if you are running a brand or some kind of creative channel where some of your goals you have set up might be maximizing impressions or click-throughs. This will come back around later in the video, but I think it's fair to argue that the majority of internet users within the age range of maybe 12 to 30 have a pretty firm grasp of what furry is, even as outsiders looking in. This study right here supports the conclusion that the misconception of furries being nothing more than a bunch of sexual deviants is becoming more and more outdated with time and with every passing generation. So in terms of the language being used, yeah, you're gonna piss off some reactionary conservatives, but generally speaking, there's a huge and ever-expanding safe space for being a furry on the internet. To put it concisely, it is not a controversial move to brand oneself and one's content as quote-unquote furry media, in my opinion, but what doesn't make for controversy doesn't always mean it's good for numbers either. This is the first and perhaps most obvious disadvantage to branding as furry. This shit is not mainstream. If you are a brand looking to scale up and up and up, well, it's just common knowledge that at some point you're going to have to break into the mainstream. And as we can observe, even on this platform, there seems to be an upper limit imposed on furry creators in terms of influence, and for YouTube specifically, subscriber count. I'm talking about the big guys, Majira Strawberry, Pokari Roo, Beta Ada Delota, Fluke Husky, and Odin Wolf, who, despite YouTube's efforts, I will not forget his lasting legacy, all of whom distinctly brand themselves as furry, and with much love and respect to these creators, their numbers have more or less stagnated around 150 to 300k. Of course, this is no small feat. Personally, I would be more than content to peak somewhere around there. But, as every YouTube creator who is looking to sustain themselves on their content alone knows all too well, it's the view count on videos that reap in the big buckaroos. And forgive me for saying, I just don't think r/furry IRL reaction videos are very viable in the long run. If you look at the best performing YouTube videos made by furries for furries, it's usually stuff marketed towards those who are just getting into the fandom and who aren't already longtime residents. And then we have the much smaller furry channels on here that have been popping up like crazy recently. A lot of their content appears to aim towards the more seasoned furry demographic, which I can appreciate, but if you look at some of the broader trends in the furry community, there is a worrying steep decline with age. It's not insurmountable. The one thing I can say about this is it could be the case that these surveys are a bit outdated, and that furries my age or younger may be more inclined to stay the course even in their 30s and 40s. Though I have to give massive props to Fur Science, as I think they do some of the most unbiased and honestly entertaining research out there. Anywho, this analysis of the state of furry YouTube and its takeaways kind of lead into other social media platforms as well. Though it may not be obvious now, I would posit that TikTok furs are probably not generally as concerned about longevity as they maybe should be, but this could be more of a general observation about TikTok as a platform, so I'll abandon this thought for now. Negative number 2. It's just not professional. Okay, this one hurts to talk about, as I am a big proponent of unprofessionalism. But I do have to say, there still exists a major bias against furry creators in the broader economy. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't think furries pose much in the way of controversy. Unless you're, of course, some Karen who is using the plight of some defenseless alt kid with fox ears to make a broader statement about the woke agenda or some dumb shit. However, and I do have to bring this up, there is still a pretty commonplace contagion to call furries cringe. I mean, even I go back and forth on whether or not I'm contributing to the issue with some of my self-deprecating humor. Because, yeah, currently speaking, I do kind of fit under the furry umbrella, and I do sometimes refer to myself as cringe because, well, we're a bit silly and carefree. So this has been a hot button topic amongst video essayists as of recent. I think of this one by Curtis Connor that really popped off a little over a year ago. So people are really starting to reassess the phenomenon of cringe culture as toxic behavior. And to their point, yeah, I think this shit can really get out of hand and often expose deeper problematic behaviors like transphobia or ableism. Cringing itself is not the issue. We all cringe at things and behaviors that we, I guess, don't align with in practice. But it's another step above and beyond to get others on board and just collectively dunk on someone for no reason but to feel better about yourself. Which is a mindset that might seem alien to us, but I bet you we all engage in it to some degree without even realizing. I digress. The reality is that these behaviors don't just exist in a bubble, but also present themselves in the world of professionality. There's a reason why many have presented the argument that you shouldn't come out as a furry. For brevity, I will link this video, which I enjoy on the topic. The real world doesn't involve just us and who we trust the most. It consists of employers, landlords, the general business class, the alike. And they do have a tendency to look down upon furries and furry culture. And despite their opinions coming from a place of blindness, we do unfortunately have to do their bidding. It's just a fact of life. I have less patience for those who devalue minority groups, but in terms of furry, personally I don't feel like they owe me a mutual understanding on the matter. Unless it just comes out, of course, that I suit up to cons and they react harshly for whatever reason. The next thing I wanted to bring up is more or less my place in this conversation. I mean, I made this video after all, but after all this criticism towards labeling one's brand as furry, there's still this one elephant in the room, or kangaroo for that matter. Yep, it's this guy right here. Surely using a PNG avatar of an anthropomorphic kangaroo would all but doom my channel to the same outcome as many others before me. And to that I say, I can name 50 other reasons why this channel will fail, but more importantly, I would argue that my choice of avatar kinda means nothing in the grand scheme of things. If anything, it's actually good for engagement, because, and here's my point, anthropomorphism is widely popular. Furry is not. Okay, well both are in some way, but the two are not one and the same. I don't know why I'm goofing this up. Furry is popular, but anthropomorphism is more popular, and it's not even close. Okay, we're locked in on that one. We like talking animals. If you don't, you're lying. My previous video covers this in pretty good detail, but the overarching message is that anthropomorphization is a practice that defines us as a species. I'm talking about the human species. And I won't bore you with historic examples, but I'm sure you've seen this prevalent theme of animal avatars and mascots all over the internet and in real life. So, how much should we care about this when it really comes down to it? Well, that's up for you to decide. All I'm saying is that there's not necessarily a demand to present as an all-gas, no-brakes furry just because you want to dabble a little bit with anthropomorphization, but you could if you wanted to. Side note, furry has no presentation, if you ask me. Or in other words, there's no defining style in the world of furry media. Sure, there's a certain look, in the eyes especially, of anthro drawings and what have you, that kinda gets me to say in my head, I bet this isn't their first rodeo. But so what? It's not like there's this uncanny valley you need to worry about. It's all adorable in my book. I mean, if my grandma saw my pin of Mark, she'd just think, oh, how cute, a kangaroo. And not, you're one of them, aren't you? It's only when you explicitly tell someone you're a furry that they start going, furry? What's a furry? And it's kind of a dangerous slope from there. So in a roundabout way, I'm gonna continue to present ambiguously unless it's explicitly mentioned that I'm a furry. And this is mostly because I plan to cover a range of topics outside of the fandom, which, it would be kind of a distraction to keep referencing the fact at that point anyway. But I'm not going to prohibit access to that information for anyone who gets curious and wants to find out on their own. I mean, just look at Chipflake. He's a massively successful storytime YouTuber who kind of kept the furry stuff on the DL, until somewhat recently, that is. And I mean, if you just look at some of his thumbnails, it's not necessarily surprising, but nor is it super public information, and why should it be? By most accounts, it's just a hobby and a subculture. So, unless you're explicitly serving the interests of other furries, I think there's a lot you can get away with, and the algorithm certainly wouldn't bat an eyelash. I hope that made sense. I know that I've been centering my argument around why not to tie your brand to the furry label, but I want to reiterate that this is all just my opinion. I just wanted to highlight some of the ways that furry and creator audiences are segmented in terms of whom and what the content serves. I do think furry is still kind of a niche market, despite the fandom growing significantly in size year after year. I do believe that the public perception of furry is trending in the positive direction, but it's nowhere near where it would need to be for me to say, go nuts and slap furry stickers on everything. Unfortunately, it can be a bad look to be so bold and upfront about something so nerdy and so infantilized in the eyes of the wider public. Though, like I said, in most cases, it wouldn't stir up controversy if you did. But the folks mainly of the creator faction for whom I really want this message received, I just hope you come out with a better understanding of the trip-ups that come with branding yourself as a furry in such an extra-personal fashion. Once again, in no way is this more important to think about than in wanting to scale your brand to reach new heights. When it comes to furries, there is quite the ceiling in place in terms of outreach, but it's more so about the content you deliver and not the artist behind the effort. On that note, you can be furry in private and normie in public whilst still cleverly blending bits of both lifestyles here and there, which is where I think I'm going to take things with my channel. It's all ultimately up to you if you decide that furry is just too much of a commitment to have at the center of your marketing mix in a constantly evolving landscape. Or maybe you're just incredibly locked into the concept of riding the wave of furry into mainstream culture. But with that, you would have to contend with the considerable population of those who want the fandom to stay niche and weird and tucked away from society's money-grabbing fingertips. It's a whole other can of worms that I may consider making a video on someday. So we made it to the end. If you've stuck this video out, then you're probably one of my friends on Telegram whom I promoted this towards. But if you're not, that's pretty epic. You're all epic, actually. Thank you, whoever you are, for supporting me on my wild YouTube journey. And for supporting indie media. Like, kudos, man. My current schedule, if I can stick to it, has me working on and releasing a new video every 3 weeks. I'm probably going to continue to cover fandom-related stuff while I work on my comic or whatever in the background, though I've always wanted to do a fan art-esque spotlight series, possibly on fellow indie comic creators. Hopefully I can manage both. Alright, until next time, y'alls. I still do not have a proper sign-off.